a Yorkshire Party candidate, Councillor Andrew Cooper, the Green Party candidate and a Kirklees councillor, Councillor Stuart Galton, Liberal Democrat candidate and a Leeds councillor, and Councillor Matthew Robinson, Conservative candidate and also a Leeds councillor. This event is being recorded and we will send details on how to watch it back again to all attendees after today's session. We'll also post it on Living Street's YouTube channel. So the format for today, I'm going to kick off by introducing our manifesto for walking. We will then hear a 5-minute presentation from each candidate. I will then put your questions to the panel. So please don't be shy. Use the Q&A function on the bottom right hand of your Zoom to submit your questions. You can also make comments in the chat function on the bottom left of the screen. So first of all, I'm delighted to launch our manifesto for walking. This sets out our call to action for the mayoral candidates. We want everyone in West Yorkshire to live a healthy, active and easy life without a car. But in too many places, this is just not possible. It's absolutely important that post-COVID, and we have a picture on the next slide about this gentleman who put out this sign saying how lonely he was during COVID. And we know that it exacerbated and highlighted the already existing inequalities in our society. We know that if young people can't get around, it threatens their social mobility. And this is a generation that has paid a very deep price through disruptions to school and university education and disruptions to employment. And we know that inactivity threatens our physical health, and really that walking is in some ways a bit of a miracle cure for all of this. So there's Tony Williams there from Hampshire putting a poster in his window asking for friends after his wife's sudden death. What we know from our research is that places with more cars, people have fewer friends. So how do we create space away from the car and reallocate it to people and society? We know that we want to also see walking as part of an ambitious programme of levelling up. Tackling inequalities means that at the moment in transport, the richest 10% of the population get almost 4 times as much public spending on their transport needs as the poorest 10% because they use cars and trains. And we also know that residents of deprived communities travel less than the better off, but they experience the impact of other people's travel choices and are disproportionately affected by traffic noise and air pollution. So there are some signs of hope. We know DFT's travel tracker has shown how many more of us walked and cycled during lockdown, but we also see a mixed picture with young people where we see girls being more active during lockdown than boys, but overall boys doing less physical activity than girls. So some very interesting pictures and differences between the sectors there as well. So our manifesto for walking, this is what our members and the people we work with have told us they want you as mayoral candidates to do, to reduce deaths and injuries, tackle air pollution and carbon emissions, and get more families walking to school. So our 4-point plan. You have it up there, ending deaths and injuries, tackling air pollution, making school streets safe and making walking easier. So, first of all, ending deaths and injuries on roads. This means we'd like to see a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit in built-up areas and much better enforcement of people who break those speed limits. Improving crossings and junctions, making sure it's safe to cross and making sure there's a pedestrian crossing at every signalised junction, which is certainly not the case, as I know from my time in Wakefield. Over 42% of deaths and serious injuries to pedestrians on West Yorkshire's roads happen at those junctions. So addressing this tragedy should be an urgent priority. We'd like to see a new child-friendly streets fund to cut rat running. As traffic falls, more children play out, air quality improves, and that social part of walking starts to grow. Our second call to action is to tackle our climate emergency. So we'd like ambitious targets to reduce car, van and taxi journeys. We'd like to see a rollout of low emission zones and an increase in controlled parking zones. We'd like to reallocate parking spaces for other uses, such as cycle hangers, parklets and other community assets. And we want to see an end to idling. Finally, we'd like to see more green corridors with greater diversity and pocket parks along routes where people walk and cycle. If we look at the next slide, our third call is to make school streets safe. 1 in 4 cars at the morning peak is on the school run. So we'd like to see a walk to school fund for West Yorkshire to transform the routes to school, to make them safer and cleaner and less congested. We'd like investment in behaviour change programmes, targeting areas where walk to school rates are lowest. We want to see school streets the default option, and we want to see a school street in every single ward. This is a brilliant way to demonstrate to communities that their children are being put first. And we'd like you to work with local authorities to improve routes to school through that 20-mile-an-hour default speed limit. We can help you do that. We deliver WOW, our year-round walk to school challenge. So it's imperative. We know we can deliver these results, and in areas where we work, we see a 23% increase in walking rates, and cars journeys to the school gates can reduce by up to 1/3. The cost benefit is amazing for this programme. So it gives a cost benefit ratio of £9 for every £1 invested if you include the adult and child health benefits of this programme. We're excited about Walk to School Week, which is taking place on the 17th of May this year. We hope it will happen. We had to cancel it last year and push it back to October, but we had nearly 200,000 pupils walking, cycling, wheeling, scooting and skating to school. And you've got some of our children that we work with there enjoying their school run. Our final ask is about cutting the pavement clutter. We've got some pictures there for you of, as the electric vehicle charging points are rolled out, why are they on the pavement, not on the road? Why have we got A boards and bike parking on the roads? We know that our pavements aren't really fit for purpose, and COVID and social distancing have shown us that. So we can see how difficult life is for the people with disabilities, for older residents, wheelchair users and families with buggies. So we'd like to see car-free areas across the region and investment in public spaces for recreation. Finally, we know that some of these pieces are difficult. We know that not all of the emergency active travel schemes that were put in were uniformly welcomed across the country, and we think that better communication, making sure the voices of young people, of Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities are heard, of older people. We run walking groups with older people, which has been a lifeline for so many people during the pandemic, means that you're giving voice to the voiceless. What we do know is that people tend to overestimate opposition to these projects and programmes, and that once they're put in and the initial controversy has passed, that actually people do not want to go back to the bad old days of car dominance. So I hope that that has given you some food for thought, and we know that we need to be ambitious for our streets and neighbourhoods, and that by making West Yorkshire attractive and accessible and working to improve its public transport, we hope that whoever is elected as the new mayor will put these plans at the heart of their programme for change for West Yorkshire. So thank you very much for listening. I am now going to invite our first speaker, to Tracy Brabin, to present. So from alphabetical order, Tracy, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mary, and what a treat to be here today to launch your fantastic, ambitious manifesto. And anybody that hasn't read it, please do read it, because it's got some fabulous suggestions in there. And certainly I'll be using it as a blueprint if I'm honoured enough to be voted in as the new West Yorkshire Metro Mayor, to use it as a blueprint for my plans for West Yorkshire, my integrated transport network system. Because we've seen, haven't we, at the beginning of lockdown, how car use dropped off, and how suddenly we were able to reclaim our streets from whether it's rollerblading, skateboarding, playing out in the street, going for long walks, even animals becoming more confident in using our streets. And as we rebuild back, we want to make sure that we can keep some of that preciousness for our communities and make sure we don't rebuild back it how we were. Certainly as a member of parliament for the last 5 years, my inbox is always full of complaints about speeding cars, about the quality of the experience walking to school with your children, lack of crossings outside schools and dangerous crossings. So my vision for walking across our region is really, really simple and really does chime with Living Streets and your manifesto. I want as many people who are able to walk on foot and be safe, whether it's mobility scooters or whether it's in wheelchairs or on your skateboard, so that you can enjoy our streets. Certainly to encourage people from across the community to get more active. And certainly it's something vital that's coming out of this pandemic, because it combats, as we've heard, against loneliness and increases our health. And we're in the middle of a climate crisis. This also contributes to our commitment to reduce carbon emissions by getting more cars off the road. Because certainly when I speak to people about my vision for transport across the region, public transport is the one thing that comes up. It's about buses, it's about trains. And I want to make the case that it's also about walking and cycling. And transport decisions affect where we walk, how far we can, if it's safe, also in the day and in the night time. And certainly my motivation as mayor will be, how do we get as many people out of petrol guzzling, emitting cars as possible and get more people onto our streets and onto our pavements. And certainly in the run up to COP26 in Glasgow this year, I'm very glad that the government have announced more money for funding initiatives for walking and cycling in our communities. But of course, when we're out and about, we also see in places where there's pavements that are not fit for purpose, narrow passages, uneven ground, unsafe passages, as you've seen with parking on pavements, and in many areas a very narrow path forcing people to walk in the road to maintain social distancing. But it's so important that if we get people onto pavements, that they are safe. And I was very happy to support my friend Holly Lynch, the MP for Halifax's 10-minute rule bill. We've been doing quite a bit of work on this, on high performance vehicles, because in Batley and Spen, for example, there are young people who hire these extraordinary cars for one-off events and then loan them to their friends. Then there needs to be greater accountability for who is responsible if there are accidents. And sadly, I have been at too many funerals and sat in too many front rooms of people who've lost loved ones to high performance speeding cars. Our cobbled narrow roads just are not racetracks. They're not fit for those cars. So it's something that I'll definitely be focusing on, working with the police. And as we see children going back to school, finally, it's what we all want to see next week. We must improve walking across the region as we look to recover from the pandemic. And we can't have an ambitious integrated transport network without viable walking routes. We need to focus on getting healthier lives for our constituents and also making it one of our pillars to tackle loneliness in our communities. So my ambition going forward is to work closely with organisations like Living Streets to make West Yorkshire a place where you can walk and enjoy our brilliant communities and provide the infrastructure needed, as well as fostering healthy, environmentally conscious modes of transport. So if it's not too cheesy, I want to walk hand in hand with our communities as soon as it's safe to do so. And I look forward to nothing more than making real changes with organisations like yourself. So thank you for my vision for West Yorkshire.
Thank you very much indeed, Tracy, for that fantastic opening speech, and for keeping to time as well. And I certainly echo your thoughts on the high performance vehicles. That was something that sadly we experienced when I was in Wakefield. Bob, we're going to move on to Bob Buxton, who is the Yorkshire Party candidate. Over to you, Bob. Bob, can you unmute? The traditional call to unmute. I don't know if my colleague can unmute. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, sorry, I think when he put him muted me there. Okay, dokes. So thank you for the invite here today. I'm Bob Buxton. I'm the leader of the Yorkshire Party. I live in Rawdon, Leeds, and I work in Bradford. I don't drive. My commute to work, it's over an hour walking direction and 50 minutes on the train. And sometimes I walk the full 6 miles. My main hobbies are I strongly support your cause. I'm going to go through your manifesto ideas and give my reactions to all the different parts in there. So as a parish councillor in Rawdon, I've supported new 20 zones and there's speed indication signs, that's the smiley face signs, in residential built up areas. And they're especially important, of course, where you've got lots of school children and elderly residents. People do still break the speed limits, so we clearly need more enforcement in key black spot areas. I agree 100% about tackling rat runs. We also need to look at the condition of roads, including potholes and drainage. Of course, improper drainage is a massive contributor to accidents and potholes as well, and make you be dragged off your driving line. One of the points in manifesto is to improve crossings and junctions to make sure there are pedestrian crossings at every signalised junction. Do I support that? Absolutely, yes, I do. It's a bugbear of mine that so many crossings have no pedestrian crossing, or at least not for all directions. So a pedestrian has to do 3 sides of a square or take a risky shortcut. It's human nature to take that shortcut, particularly for kids. It's not too surprising that 40% of serious accidents happen in this instant. A junction is actually a very dangerous place to cross where there isn't a pedestrian crossing. And yet by having lights just for the traffic guard, it's encouraging people to do that. That is something which needs to be done and can be done, I believe, quite efficiently. I've campaigned for the Green Belt for 7 years to preserve the Green Belt. It provides with green corridors. It provides boundaries between towns and villages. It stops urban sprawl. I've also campaigned for inner city green spaces and sports fields. In Leeds alone, we're set to sports fields in Horsforth and Wortley. One of those also Greenbelt. How is that the best way forward? We need green spaces in inner city areas as well, of course, give people somewhere to get lunch hour. And also with the Greenbelt, if we want to encourage walking, there has to be somewhere nice to walk. The best way but pedestrian road deaths and all road deaths is for West Yorkshire to have a mass transit system linking every community, taking traffic off the roads, making the roads safe to cross, and also increasing walk to school greatly. Many parents will say they don't want their kids to walk to school. It might be okay if they're free to walk with them, but if they're not, they're worried about their safety. You can't argue with that. So if we want to encourage walk to work, then walk to school, and indeed walk to work, then of course we want to make the roads a lot safer. And also a mass transit system can provide access to countryside walks. My wife and I used to often use the train to go to places like Ilkley to have a nice walk there, but couldn't get to where we live now in Rawdon on the train. It's also the best way to cut air pollution. It's in Leeds 20% above the maximum recommended levels, and of course we want it to be much better than that. And if we're going to meet environmental targets which are demanding, then obviously that's got to be done. In the shorter term, because obviously a mass transit system will take a good decade to achieve, we need more electric charging points, and we need electric buses. By 2030, we should look to have entirely electric buses. Now, my kids walk to school. We're fortunate to have short, safe routes, supported by traffic lights where necessary. Not everybody's that fortunate. So having read your manifesto, I believe a walk to school fund is a very good idea. Something which schools and perhaps town parish councils can bid to to get some funding. I believe we can probably get decent value for money. The budget is very limited for the mayor. Hopefully something where a little money can go a very long way. We can look to employ a lollipop ladies and men as well, with appropriate training to keep everybody safe, of course. School streets are a great idea where they're practically possible and where they're required. And I agree with the idea you've got to work with local authorities, consult communities. It's a balancing act. You certainly don't want to accidentally cause a rat run and cause safety issues elsewhere or congestion and pollution elsewhere. So it's got to be done carefully, as you suggest, but certainly a good idea. I certainly support greater education in schools, and the Yorkshire Party has long since supported education with cycling safety and driving safety, even as early as primary schools. People start to drive at 17. You want to start their education on that much earlier. You wouldn't just start teaching them maths if you want them to do A-level maths at 17. Start the education earlier. And also with things like e-scooters, where they can actually get to dangerously high speeds. People unfortunately have been killed on e-scooters because they weren't wearing any protective headgear. Now I want to finish by addressing the other commitments that you're asking us to make. Cut the clutter, absolutely, completely support that. Walking networks, absolutely. Paths need better drainage, so do roads. And inner city regeneration, which can be part of housing, of course, and also have green areas and walking areas.
If you can
we also need to work,
please,
I think, with, sorry, we need to work with farmers with rights of way, of course, and we need integrated walking systems and public transport coordinated with a mass transit system. So apologies, I've clearly gone a little bit over time there, but I'll do everything in my power to deliver a mass transit system which will help on a number of these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob, and some fascinating insights there into both your personal commute. Well done on your 6 miles a day. I'm sure that's you've certainly got your walk in there. And also your point about desire lines and crossing. One of the interesting things we did in Living Streets with our group in London is to look at every single crossing in Greater London and hand back to Transport for London and say, this is what's happening. This is people can't move in London. They changed the pedestrian crossing at Oxford Circus, and the sales in the Nike shop there went up by about 30% because people were crossing on an X instead of doing that four-sided square. So some really simple things. If you design for pedestrian desire lines, you can actually help the economy. So the high street is a really important part of building back better as well. And we know that the pedestrian pound is incredibly valuable. So thank you very much indeed for that. It's my pleasure now to introduce Councillor Andrew Cooper, the Green Party candidate and Kirklees councillor. Andrew, the floor is yours, and do please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, and morning all to everybody. This isn't a agenda I'm genuinely committed to. I remember looking about 20 years ago at a public footpath sign, and things go through your mind. And I looked at it and I went, you never see a sign saying road pointing, do you? You never see that. But yet somehow or other, I found it bizarre when I thought of it that way. I thought, why do we have a sign saying public? It doesn't say where it's going to, it doesn't say how long it's going to get there, take to get there. And so one of the things that I immediately became an obsession of mine was getting this public footpath signs changed in Kirklees. I wasn't able to do it for Kirklees. We had opposition from the administration at the time there. But I did manage to get it done in the Newsham ward that I represent. And if you go around the Newsham ward now, you will see public footpath signs saying where they're going and how long it will take them to get there. 1 out of 23 wards. So that's the difference a green can make as far as walking is concerned. It's something I continue to push on because it is a commitment. So when you're actually looking at walking, it requires real change. And I very much welcome the manifesto because it is a challenge. It's a challenge to the incoming mayor, whoever that might be, but it's also a challenge to the existing councils and the choices that they make. So looking at the West Yorkshire Transport Fund at the moment, of the £875 million that's in that fund, £660 million of that funding is on road building, road widening, road projects. And I think we've seen a lot recently about mass transit systems, various other things. But the reality is that at the moment, at the regional level, we are supporting the car and we're supporting auto transport. So that needs to change. That's something that the mayor needs to do. And the existing councils, the existing Labour-led councils, are the ones that support that sort of approach. Traffic calming, again, is something I remember when I first stood to be elected 21 years ago, and I remember the candidate opposing me saying, "Don't vote Green because they'll put traffic calming everywhere." And you know what? He was right. I have been pushing on traffic calming ever since. And you will hear, anybody will hear probably that that when they're trying to get traffic calming on a street, that often officers will come back to you and say, "I'm terribly sorry, but there's not been enough accidents or deaths on this road, and therefore we haven't got any traffic calming. We can't do traffic calming." So what we've done in the area I represent is we've used our local ward budgets and we prioritise traffic calming in those areas. Other people have prioritised other things. We prioritise traffic calming. So we've gone up against a little bit of opposition every now and again, but we've overcome it, and you will see more traffic calming in the area I represent than others. And it's about political priorities. It's about where you put the money. And so we can all say nice things about pedestrianisation, about road safety, but we've actually got to do it. And the same applies for 20-mile-per-hour zones. We have been pushing for years on the 20's plenty approach. And very much in Kirklees, the Greens have been strong supporters of the 20's plenty approach. But it's the existing administrations, actually of all colours over the years, that we found difficulty with to overcome that. And it is really, a lot of the time they're saying, well, we need enforcement. We need to have traffic calming in before we will do that. But I think actually setting up 20-mile-per-hour zones sends a strong message about expectations of people who are driving in those areas. And those expectations will hopefully lower those speeds, because people see a 30 sign, travel at 35 or 40. So saying that it's a 20-mile-per-hour zone, I think, would be a very positive first step. Slowways isn't actually mentioned as part of this project, and I can see it's, in some ways, it's very much a developing thing. It's a new thing. It's about connecting towns through walking. I would like to see slowways as part of this agenda, really, about promoting pedestrianisation at a longer level. One of the things I thought would be really good for the manifesto is to establish a mayor's charter mark, where we look at the councils and say, if your council has actually matched all the items that are in the Living Streets manifesto, then it gets a mayor's charter mark. Then we will say that Calderdale, Wakefield, who knows, even Kirklees might be one of those councils that gets that mark. And it should be tough, and it should be challenging, and it should be something which requires real change to make a real difference there for people. So yes, wholeheartedly support the manifesto, but it is something that candidates should not agree to lightly, because it is challenging and it goes against what is happening at the moment in the councils across West Yorkshire. And so if the mayor is going to make a difference, that challenge has got to be met, and I support the manifesto.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thank you so much for your thoughts there, and I'm just considering a charter mark, a Living Streets charter mark. We'll have to take that back and think about it with the team. One of the points around your 20-mile-an-hour piece is that, of course, in Wales, it will be a default from 2023. It's a national default speed limit in built-up areas. So this is coming, and it's coming not a million miles away. So there's some very interesting things that are happening, and I think building on the big behaviour change that we've seen through COVID is going to be really important. And just on the slow ways piece, I mean, that is a cross-country network across Hill and Dale. We're predominantly a kind of, if you like, everyday walking charity, so it's about the everyday walk to school, to the shops, to see your friends, but of course we support it, and it's an absolutely brilliant initiative, so thank you for that. Right, our next speaker, thank you. The questions are coming thick and fast now, so thank you, keep them coming. Councillor Stuart Galton, Liberal Democrat candidate and councillor in Leeds. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Mary. I hope you're going to discipline me in terms of time, because I just tend to ramble on, and because the conversation that we've had, even though it's been one way so far, I'm absorbing quite a lot from people here. And I think everybody wants to have the same outcome, which is having livable streets that people can feel the confidence to move around. But I think sometimes the way that we implement them can actually have an impact, which means that we're not achieving as much as we could. So, for instance, one of the things I first thought of here is we always think about how we move around during the day, whereas actually our streets should be accessible to all at all times. And, you know, the evening economy, for instance, is something which is very important, especially post-COVID, for all of our local businesses that are involved in entertainment and leisure. They need to have safe streets where people feel confident to go out and walk there. And sometimes local authorities will say, I'm all for safe streets. And in the next breath, they'll be turning out streetlights, which means that some people who are older and more vulnerable, and particularly women, won't feel the confidence to go out on the streets on their own. And given the fact that there was a big campaign not so long back to reclaim the streets, we shouldn't be handing them back. So let's do something about the nighttime streets as well. Another area is feeling safe on our streets. If we are going to be using walking more often, we really need to pay attention to the segregated walkways, because that's where people often feel most safe because it's further away from the traffic and they are ancient ways a lot of the time which connect up different parts of the community and should be enabled to be used. And unfortunately, with the cutback in local authority funding, the maintenance of those areas are the ones that tend to get cut back first. And if we're actually going to make our streets livable and have a proper walking network, then those need to be safeguarded and enhanced. And we might need to have a new model of enhancement. And this brings me back to Andrew Cooper's point earlier about the combined authority and how it shows its commitment to walking through how it actually hands out its money. And I completely agree. There is definitely a hierarchy of investment in the combined authority, and it always starts off with trains in terms of new train stations, then it goes down to buses, and then when it gets to active travel with cyclists and walking, you are an afterthought. And for instance, there's a scheme in my area, £11 million, £200,000 of it is actually on walking. And what we should be doing is enabling each community to think about how they wish to develop, especially post-COVID, for all the opportunities and all the experiences that we've been through. We need to be able to plan ahead. And I think as mayor, you can't do everything yourself as mayor in the combined authority, but as Andrew Cooper said, you can challenge the local authorities that are its consistent parts. And I would like to see every local community enabled to deliver their own local transport plan. Because too often transport plans are something which are created on high and then transplanted onto communities, and they're a desktop exercise. And we really need to narrow that distance between our highways professionals who are interpreting money into infrastructure and actually connect them more effectively to the community. And I think this is where living streets could really make a difference in terms of creating a template and a model whereby we can talk to communities and avoid some of those failures that we had recently about those traffic-free streets that were implemented at very short speed due to government diktat by transport professionals who didn't actually spend the time to talk to the community and didn't take into consideration the needs of minorities like those that are disabled. And finally, I'd just like to emphasize that it's not just about getting around our urban streets. One of the key things about the COVID experience was making sure that people can experience nature effectively. And too often, the walking infrastructure to get into our green areas and into woods is something which is less formalized. And I think we should make a commitment to think about people who have limited mobility or are disabled and might need access to a scooter, for instance. They might not be walking, but they certainly need to be amongst other people who are walking and enjoying the same environment. So I think a commitment could be made around there with the combined authority budget. Thank you, Mary.
Brilliant. Well done for keeping to time. You came in just on time there. So thank you very much indeed, Stuart. And I really echo what you say about night walking, as we're stuck in at home all day and people going out for walks late at night and seeing their neighbours walking the dog. It's certainly something that all of us have been doing a lot more of lately. Thank you. Right. It's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker, Councillor Matthew Robinson, Conservative candidate and a councillor in Leeds. Matthew, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mary, and welcome to everybody this morning who's joined us. And thank you to Living Streets for the invite. I'm so pleased that you've published this manifesto and are championing this cause, because it's something that's close to my heart as somebody that's represented a rural community, somebody that has often enjoyed walking, but also as somebody who's become a new dog owner through lockdown. I've been out walking more than most. So safe routes for dogs too. Let's make sure we champion that. But this couldn't have been more topical, because this morning I had an email from a constituent who told me that part of the new greenway that connects to my ward the work has just completed this morning, and it's opened up, which will help connect walkers, cyclists to a local train station, which helps improve active travel. And it's absolutely those sort of incremental changes, as well as the big changes, that we need to make sure that we champion. And the last year has seen an explosion in people who wish to go out walking. I have now met neighbours who I'd only ever seen from the waist up because they were in the driver's seat of their car. I've seen them out walking, and it is brilliant, because we are seeing people who are keen to be healthier. They are keen to improve the environment. We know that it also doesn't just improve your physical health, but it's your mental health from being out walking and being close to nature, as Stuart said, and from seeing other residents tackling that loneliness agenda. And I've been really pleased, and I hope others are, that organisations like Welcome to Yorkshire have championed Walkshire too, as well. And it's not just about making sure it's one area of Yorkshire that we champion, although we will all be championing West Yorkshire, but it's all of Yorkshire together, because the tourist pound, you called it the pedestrian pound there, Mary, that really, really will help many of our businesses, many of our communities, particularly as we look to open up. The manifesto talks about clutter on pavements, and Tracy mentioned this too. My inbox over the last 10 years has been filled with people who have talked about clutter on pavements, particularly people who are parking on pavements as well. We know that this disproportionately impacts the young and the disabled, and it absolutely has to be tackled. And the powers are there for a mayor to do this. They can absolutely do this. It's not just combined to Transport for London anymore. But this morning, I'm pleased to announce that if I'm elected mayor, what I will do is I will make sure that we have a new road safety plan for every single ward across West Yorkshire. That will bring the police together, the councils together, partners together, and it will be published so that residents can hold to account the councils and the police for ensuring road safety is a priority in their area. They can feed into the process and make sure that we are tackling the areas that matter most to residents. I've spent 10 years investing in SIDS, in new pavement schemes, in making sure that we have a much more open and available space for pedestrians. And one of the best things we can do is to continue championing that through published documents to make sure that we are held to account. And we need to make sure that we also revisit the West Yorkshire Road Partnership. At the moment, it does not seem to work for pedestrians and for those who are walking. It takes too much account of just what's going on our roads rather than those who are walking along our roads. And we need to make sure it's published in that document and that it is reviewed, that partnership, to ensure that there is buy-in. And similarly, Stuart talked about this, and it's always the case when you go last, people always pinch your points first. But the Woodland Trust has talked about people being 10 to 15 minutes walk from woodland. And that has to absolutely be a priority, not just for climate change, but for the well-being agenda that we wish to champion too, I think, whoever is elected there. And I know we need greater investment in our public rights of way too. So many people have come back to me and said, I've been out walking, this highway, this piece of road, this rural walk is a disgrace. And we need to make sure that we are championing that. I represent it. We've put money in as local councillors in the past, but it needs to be a bigger priority for the mayor, as well as ensuring we connect our communities. Finally, the manifesto talks about green corridors, and we
Thank you very much indeed for that, Matt, and a very sobering end to what you were saying there in terms of speeding and speed-related deaths, but also some very interesting points. And we're delighted to hear you about your lockdown puppy. Perhaps we can, perhaps he'll make an appearance before we're through.
I hope not. I've put him in the other room just in case.
He's locked away. Good. Well, we've had some fantastic questions, so I'm going to start, if I may, by asking three. The first is from Clive, who says, we had a great time during lockdown out walking on West Yorkshire's beautiful country lanes. And this is something that is close to my heart and I miss a great deal. Most country lanes and roads haven't got footpaths. More and more cars are using them, many driving fast. We realised what had been spoiled during the first lockdown. It was restful, relaxing, safe, but now the cars are back. What will you do to make walking and cycling along country roads safe and enjoyable? The second is a question from Paul Marchant. Do the candidates support road charging to reduce car dominance, pollution and danger? And the third is from Jen Barkley, who's a member of Access for the Disabled and Clean Air Bradford. She says active travel measures focus on walking and cycling for the physically able. How would the panelists tackle pavement parking and car idling while stationary? Both police and local authority here in Bradford are resisting taking the action which our members need. And I'm going to start this time with Bob, if I may. So country roads, vehicle idling and car charging, yes or no?
Okay, so first of all, lockdown walking, so I mentioned there that there's lots of roads without paths. Again, it's a personal bugbear of mine. I find this a lot. Indeed, I'm a dog walker too. So yes, we need to look at putting in paths there, absolutely, and not only in the countryside. Those of us who are out leafleting will know there's plenty of streets where there's just no footpath. Ironically, I was nearly knocked down by a car whilst posting leaflets on Batter Lane in Rawdon, which were about road safety. So yes, it's something that's tackling, lack of footpaths needs tackling in the city and out of it. Road charging, so I assume talking about congestion charges. I think we want to make sure people have an alternative. And I think once we've got a proper mass transit system, that is then something that we can seriously look at. At the moment, too many people do not have a choice. They can't leave the car at home. The bus service are unreliable, and too many places don't really have a train service. I have to walk for actually over half an hour to get to the nearest railway station. I don't mind doing that, other people can't, perhaps. Disabled access is a very good point. I think we've made a point about cluttered streets, pavement parking. Give people tickets. That's how you do it. No question for me at all. If you haven't got enough room to get a wheelchair through, then that should be a ticketable offence, and that should be an enforced offence. I was furious in making notes. I hope I've mentioned everything there. If I've missed anything out, you can prompt me if you like.
That's perfect. Thanks very much indeed for that. We'll move to Andrew to answer those three questions now, please.
Okay, so with regard to country roads, I think one of the things which really helps with country communities is to talk about protecting the character of villages. And when you actually put just dealing with speeding traffic in those terms, you get a lot of buy-in from the local community, from people, because they're thinking, yes, I like to live in a place where it's safe to walk around. And you get less of those people who are going on about the war on the motorist and all that sort of business. So actually framing the action that you're going to take is incredibly important. So traffic calming, certainly. Installing footpaths. Why not install footpaths if we can do it? Let's get some of those footpaths in place. Obviously, if roads are narrow, we might have problems there, but let's actually look at that. Let's actually prioritise the pedestrian on occasions. So, so those are some of the thoughts on that. And I've actually been involved in some projects getting small rural villages and hamlets, getting traffic calming in those as a parish councillor, which is another one of my roles. Vehicle idling, yeah, I think that should be made an offence, and certainly we should have signage up at lights and at junctions where people are going to be there for a minute or two. Vehicles can stop and start quite easily these days, and we should make it clear that vehicle idling is not acceptable, and very much would like to see policing powers used to enforce that. Similarly with pavement parking, the mayor is going to have responsibility as West Yorkshire Police and Crime Commissioner, or at least somebody's going to be given that role as deputy mayor. So I think very much we should be saying, I think we ought to be asking for monthly reports on how many tickets we've given to people for pavement parking. And that should be part of the indicators that we're asking for from the police. In that way, we will show them that it is a priority to the mayor. And so having those questions and making sure that police report on that is very important. And of course, we want to see is a reduction in that, but we also want to know what action is actually taken.
Thank you. Stuart.
Thanks, Mary. Well, some of this actually is a consequence of the popularity of walking that's appeared in my ward. As you said, really decent infrastructure attracts people to walk. I have a really lovely part of the Erin Calder navigation in Woodlesford. And the council have invested in great tarmacking along the towpaths. So has Sustrans as part of their walking and cycling network. And it is inundated with people wanting to go and walk on that infrastructure, especially since a new service station has opened up the road, which offers a hipster coffee. Unfortunately, people tend to get to where they want to walk in a car, which is really ironic for me. So it's in terms of that tourist pressure. We don't know whether they're coming from far away or whether they're coming from very nearby, but it's creating very great pressure for local residents where they feel hemmed into their homes, and there's lots of pavement parking. So I think there needs to be something to tackle the mentality that people have from when they're within their vehicle and when they're without their vehicle for the environment that they're in. Because if you're walking along a country lane, I think you tend to think of it very much differently than if you're driving along a country lane. And I think that's part of the problem. In terms of enforcement, yes, we have a problem where the police feel that they need to tread lightly on lower level crime like this and must concentrate on something which is more high level. Whereas actually we feel that for public confidence that for them to actually comply with legislation, they are rewarded for doing so, and those that don't are punished. I think it's quite important that this kind of enforcement is stepped up by the police, and I think that's something that can be tackled by the mayor with their police and crime commissioner inherited responsibilities. In terms of road charging, now I've been resistant to this because previously it was associated with congestion charging, and it was basically punishing people for commuting to work, which isn't a great idea. However, I'm interested because the Taxpayers Alliance have all of a sudden become interested in road charging as an alternative to fuel duty and vehicle tax, because at the moment vehicles are taxed more if they are more polluting, but if more and more of us get electric vehicles, then there's less and less income coming into government. And actually, if we do want to see less cars on the road and more spent on public transport, would a road charging policy be appropriate? And actually, if the air quality is made worse by idling and low speeds on the commuting journey, then if we actually made it lower charging on off-peak periods and it enabled employers to offer flexible working, would that help? And it might enable people to access public transport more effectively too. And this is where I think a universal basic income might come in, because if people are enabled to pay up front for season tickets on public transport, it might mean that they are less likely to choose their car as their first choice in transport mode.
Great, thank you very much. Matt.
Thanks, Mary. Well, Clive says a good question about our country roads. Somebody that's represented a rural area and seen an explosion in people coming out to walk, I understand. And some of this is about actually designing out at the beginning some of the problems. So making sure that motorists have visibility of where people are coming out and exiting on their walks as well, making sure that it's very, very clear, making sure that we are enforcing the speed limits so that people are aware that there's going to be pedestrians crossing in the area, there's going to be equine crossing facilities and others, and we absolutely need to make sure we do that. I'd say to Clive as well, you don't have to just walk alongside the road. There are other off-road options that we can use and public rights of way that are available, and making sure we champion them too. And Andrew's is a good point. Villages do want to make sure that they protect the character of their area. I've found that they're not against traffic islands and crossings when they're done appropriately, when they're done in keeping with the area, and when they actually enhance the area, as opposed to what many would see at the beginning as something that's diminished and imposed on them. I'd also add that the problem we consistently get is verge creep. You know, this idea that the verge is eliminating what is the existing infrastructure that's there. If you ever ask a council officer about this, he'll say it's not a priority. If maintaining our public rights of way and our rural infrastructure and our roads and our footpaths is not a priority, I'm not sure what is for the council's departments. The question was there about road charging as well. I've said before, I'm against a congestion charge. I believe it hits the lowest earners, it hits those on fixed income. The people who can pay for it, it doesn't bother them, it doesn't turn them off, it doesn't change their motivations. Bob's point is a good one, and I agree with when there's no alternative, people will feel forced into this too. So I'm highly skeptical on that, but I'd take a lot of convincing, but I'm always open-minded and always willing to listen. And idling, yeah, this needs to be an offence. If you go out, if you see train stations, when I used to come into Leeds city centre and come into the train station, you'd have 40 cabs all sat there with their engines running that were there. And you can see outside schools, the same thing happening, outside shopping parades and local high streets. And I think most people are against this, but it takes the will to enforce it and to say, sorry, this isn't right. We're championing our environment. We're making sure we protect our space, and you're not allowed to idle here. Thanks very much. So either shift your car or turn your engine off.
And of course, that is solved by school streets where there are no cars during pick-up and drop-off time. So that's one way to get very quick behaviour change, because you just can't do it. Thanks very much indeed for that, Matt. Tracy.
Great stuff. And I have the problem that was just seen earlier, that I'm the last person on the list, but really good answers. And I think certainly whoever becomes mayor, there's no doubt we can all work together. We all want to see us hit our climate change targets and safer, cleaner communities with better air quality. So good question. So Clive, absolutely. I've been working closely with Yorkshire Water and the National Trust to look at how we have a West Yorkshire wide walking plan, and they have some really great suggestions, and certainly that's also about tree planting. I was very excited that my 4-year mission to get some cherry trees from the Japanese government has actually finally manifested itself. And so working with Yorkshire Water and National Trust, working out where those trees can go, that's a great conversation for communities where they want to be walking. And certainly earlier in the chat, it was about country roads being waterlogged and flooded. Of course, the mayor has opportunities to look at hard defences. There is a substantial fund, and I've been working with others to try and get West Yorkshire representatives around the table in these discussions, because currently it's only South Yorkshire leaders apparently that have a flooding problem and that need to meet the minister. So I've been making that case that we need to have a very swift conversation about flooding, because of course water knows no boundaries. So of course flooding shouldn't stop you from enjoying our countryside. Paul, regarding road charging and signage, you're absolutely right. And hasn't COVID and lockdown shown us that delivery vehicles are now going to be ever present in our communities, and that you can't just leave your van in the middle of the street with its engine running while you try and find a flat in a block of flats and be there for a substantial amount of time. Also, I'm with Mary 100% on making our schools better air quality for our schools. And sadly, we've seen children and a young girl in particular in London died specifically because of poor air quality. And as mayor, I will make sure that families and children at the centre of everything that I do. And of course, I will hopefully be the first ever woman Metro Mayor in the country, and families and children will certainly be a priority, their security going forward. Access for disabled with pavement parking. I mean, this is a thorny issue because there are people who say, I can't park anywhere else. The boss will take my wing mirror off unless I park on the pavement. But we do have to find a solution. And I think part of that is about persuasion and about community engagement, and also about the understanding that of the repercussions for your actions. And working with Marcia de Cordova, which is the Shadow Minister for Equalities, we've been trying to make that case that if we want greater independence for disabled in our communities, that we have to tackle the safety of pavements and our communities. So it's something that's really important to me. And, I think we have to sell our communities as places for all of us, not just road users, not just walkers, but for everyone. That's with people with buggies, wheelchairs, mobility scooters, etc. So I won't go over what others have said, but it's
road
really
charging. Where are you on road charging?
Currently, I don't think, I would suggest that only Leeds as would potentially be contemplating it. There are thoughts around potentially road charging to pay for trams. I'm not in that position at the moment, but I'd be very interested to hear what others have to say. As you know, that I'm currently developing my manifesto with roundtables. I had a manifesto for selection, and now we're digging deeper and working with communities and to make sure stakeholders have ownership of that manifesto, because I think leadership is about listening. So that's important for me to hear from you. What do you think? Often I've seen it in London that the richest companies can pay their employees road charging, congestion charge, and the roads are still as busy. So how effective is it? It's work to be done going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, there's an absolutely huge amount of questions that have come in now. So I'm not proposing to take them. Some of them have been answered. Laura McDonald's questions about, could planners not cite health impacts, not just crash deaths, to enable faster and more robust traffic slowing measures? I think some really interesting thing there. Questions about, do you support the park and ride, £5 million there for 250 commuters? So I'm not proposing that we get into the detail. I just want to finish, because we are right on the end of our allotted time, to ask a very quick fire round. It's a bit like question time. So that's changed as well, hasn't it, as a programme? But with 3 very quick questions to all of you, and this time I'm going to start with Matt. So the 3 questions that I have are from the chat. Will you commit to, if you are elected, to appoint a walking and cycling commissioner, as other mayors have done? Do you support a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit for West Yorkshire? And do you support Vision Zero, which is the vision of 0 deaths on West Yorkshire's roads? This is what London has adopted, 0 deaths by 2041. So walking, cycling commissioner, default 20-mile-an-hour, Vision 0 deaths.
I'll be quick then, Mary. Commissioners are impresario champion, whatever you want to call it. Yes, we will have one. That's not a problem. 20-mile-an-hour zones. prioritising them outside schools first, outside of our high streets, making sure they're enforced, getting people's confidence in them, and then rolling out further from there. Vision Zero, yes, I've spent 10 years arguing for better road safety in my ward, putting money into it. We still have far too many deaths on our road. It's the tragedy every single time, and I'm not willing to let that continue.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for that, Matt. Stuart.
Can you remind me of the questions, please?
It is, do you support would you appoint a walking and cycling commissioner for West Yorkshire? Do you support a default 20-mile-an-hour speed limit for West Yorkshire's roads? And do you support Vision Zero deaths on the road?
No, yes, and yes. In terms of appointing a commissioner, I don't think it's very useful to give the job of something so important to one person and expect them to solve it. I've been very disappointed with the performance of people that have been appointed, for instance, as drug czars over the years, who come forward with recommendations and then get sacked. So I think it's everybody's job. And that's why I wanted to call for community-wide transport plans to be initiated, because it's the stakeholders that need to put the measure performance, not a single person. In terms of 20-mile-per-hour zones, yes, I am frustrated, for instance, that one of the high streets in my area is an A road, and it's very hard to get anything in terms of speed reduction on such a length of road, even though it would enhance the commercial vitality of it. And this would be really helpful, I think, to enable that. And in terms of zero death, everyone should be going for that, yes.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Can we turn next to you, Andrew?
So walking and cycling commissioner, yes. And there is a but, and it's an addition really, is that I think there ought to be a walking and cycling commission to actually back up the commissioner. And those people should be experts in their field. They should be people who provide evidence. So it's not one person who's a czar, if you like, on their own, but the czar with a cabinet, with people who will help them and look out for them. And so I think sourcing those people, like we're doing for the climate change commissions that we've got in Yorkshire and various other places, should be part of that role. And so there should be people who are well supported and have expert evidence. 20-mile-per-hour default, pushing against an open door with me on that one, and you have been doing for 20 odd years. So no problem. I think the question is, whoever's going to be the mayor, how are they going to deal with all those Labour council leaders who oppose it and who make it difficult to actually achieve 20-mile-per-hour zones? They have the power now. Why isn't it being done? Why isn't it happening? What's the problem? Is my thoughts. So Vision Zero, end those deaths and have a target to do it, of course, but an action plan. There needs to be an action plan to deliver that. I've seen so many times grandiose statements being made about targets for various things, but no serious plan or the investment to achieve that. So that investment, that plan is required before we actually sign anything. Well, sign it now, but then produce the plan.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that, Andrew. Bob. Bob, you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear you.
You do keep muting me, don't you? No one blames you. No one blames you for that. So walking side commissioner, I prefer a volunteers panel on that one. If people are volunteering, it means they're doing it because they're passionate about it. I think that's probably the best way of achieving that. And in terms of cycleways, I think it's really important to consult cyclists before planning those routes. There are some where it's not a safe get out, so cyclists feel safer just on the road without a cycle lane, and obviously we need to do better than that. 20 default zones, I've already been supporting that locally as a parish councillor. Yes, in residential areas we're talking about, of course, yes. Vision of zero deaths by 2041. Yes, of course, we all support that. It's to literally achieve it is extraordinarily difficult. It's heading towards it and doing as best as we possibly can. And I support that by supporting a mass transit system. And I don't think it could possibly happen or get close to that without a mass transit system for West Yorkshire. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Bob. And finally, Tracy, walking and cycling commissioner, 20-mile-an-hour default, Vision Zero deaths.
Thank you, Mary. And I know we are overrunning, so I'll be super quick. Walking and Cycling Commissioner makes so much sense, but also talking about support for that person. It's actually about the direction of travel from, if you pardon the pun, from the Mayor's office. So working together across the councils and, you know, the great work that's happening locally within councils, drawing that together and, you know, setting that direction of travel. 20 miles an hour, you are less likely to die if you're hit by a car at 20 miles an hour than 40 miles an hour. It makes so much sense. But of course, starting in schools where it makes emotional sense for people to slow down, I think is really important. And Vision Zero, whilst our deaths in West Yorkshire have plateaued, we are going in the right direction, I think, to hit the targets for 2027. But certainly there is more to do. And I know that the automatic number plate recognition has been hugely successful, and to roll that out more widely would be very helpful as well to try and end that speeding and road deaths.
Great. Well, thank you all very much indeed. We will wrap up our Q&A session there. Thank you all very much for your contributions. We know that whether you're 9 years old or 90 years old, walking keeps you fit, happy, and it cuts air pollution. It's the greenest transport we know, and it's free. So our mission here at Living Streets is to get more people walking to school, to work, to shops, and to see their friends, and to make streets fit for purpose. We know that we can change our country with carbon emissions reduced, air quality improved, and road safety improved. And that can only happen if we shift from cars to walking and cycling. We've got a growing presence in West Yorkshire, including a fantastic local group in Leeds. So I'm sure you'll be hearing more from them. We very much look forward to working with whichever of you is elected. And for those of you who aren't elected and who are councillors, we know that our members and supporters will be in touch with you as well. Thank you to our partner organisations across the region who we work in partnership with to make these changes happen. And for our audience, if you're not a member already, we'll send you details on how you can join Living Streets after the event. We do have our walking summit coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be hearing from people across the country, including some walking and cycling commissioners, on the changes that that they have made. So that just leaves me to thank each and every one of our panel members today. I must say, when one of you mentioned leafleting along the country lanes, I think it was Bob, we wish all the best to your party colleague who was injured there, but I must say that was one part that made me think I'm not missing those walks in the rain. But thank you all very much indeed for the time that you've given to be here with us this morning for the launch of the West Yorkshire Manifesto for Walking. Thank you.